with strange bones. That's me. And we are carrying on tonight with our rather interesting live on pirates. Pirates are cool. Everyone loves pirates. I like pirates. And it's proved to be very interesting because, as it turns out, the pirates that we get from the stories are, in many cases, quite true, though sometimes a little more tragic and a little more terrifying than in the more fun stories. So I discovered, doing my research, that indeed places seen in the famous movie Pirates of the Caribbean, like Tortuga, the city of pirates, was real. And it really was a city of pirates, just as was Port Royal, which is pretty damn cool if you think about it, and explained how a great many of these pirates were able to do what they did for so long. So, with that said, we're going to start ourselves off and point out that on this channel we do what we do for the interest, for the learning, for the fun of it, for the weird, the wonderful, and the curious. And we neither promote nor deride any of these things. We simply do them because they are very, very interesting. Amanda, hi. Fourthman, hi. But that said, I will point out that we have one rule. Don't be rude. You can agree, you can disagree. You're very much encouraged to comment a great deal. Absolutely do. But yeah, if you're rude, we give you the boot. Because we don't allow that. We've had far too many trolls. But nevertheless, do comment. Your comments are always welcome. Questions, comments, considerations, we love it. And certainly do like. Likes are free, send lots of them. Share, subscribe, and do all of those things that we need so very much to keep the channel going. And with that, we are starting off with one of the most famous pirates ever, Quad High. Now, when I name him for you, you might not recognize him, because he was known by a very, very different name, which is pretty cool as well. And I refer, of course, to Edward Teach, and he was genuinely one of the pirates of the Caribbean, which is pretty cool. Now, you may not have heard him under the name Edward Teach. You might know him by the name that he earned, Blackbeard. Now, briefly, I want you to imagine you're a sailor on a merchant vessel. It's a wooden vessel, not terribly large at all. You have been raised knowing that there are terrors on the sea, that everything from sea monsters to mermaids are real. You have a ton of superstitions. Revo, how's it? That really are quite scary, that you never really know what might be out there. And one day, as you are sailing innocently along, taking your vessel with its goods through the Caribbean, a ship appears, and as it approaches, you see its flag get run up. It's a black flag with a heart pierced by an arrow dripping blood, and a devil and an hourglass. And you realize these are not friends. Cannons roar, your ship is crippled, smoke is everywhere, and through the smoke steps a figure of legend, huge, 7 foot tall, wreathed in smoke, a pistol in each hand and 4 more on a bandolier, a cutlass sheathed at his side, his great black beard and his shining eyes, and woven into his beard are slow matches, fuses essentially, that are sparking and hissing smoke, and he appears like the devil himself, roaring as he fires. That is how you would meet Blackbeard. A very terrifying individual indeed, and a very successful pirate. So who was this guy? Well, he was an Englishman from Bristol. He was hired as a privateer. Now, a privateer was somebody that was commissioned by the government. In his case, probably by Queen Anne during Queen Anne's war against the Spanish, and his job was to raid Spanish ships. That was his job. He was legally supposed to do it. However, let's just say there was history. Now, he joined Captain Benjamin Hornigold's crew in the Bahamas around 1716. After Hornigold accepted amnesty, Teach took command of a captured French slave ship and renamed it Queen Anne's Revenge, and began his career not as a privateer, but as a pirate. He was a truly terrifying man, and he won a great many of his fights, not so much by actual combat, by simply terrifying his victims, and he did it very, very well. He had a small fleet, not just one ship, and he blockaded ports like Charleston, South Carolina, and plundered ships all along the American East Coast. Despite his fearsome reputation, which he very carefully did cultivate, he wasn't always as brutal as other pirates, and often allowed crews to go free. Eventually, though, interestingly enough, in a rather strange turn of events, he was offered a pardon, which he accepted, settled down, married, and settled in Bath in North Carolina. But he soon returned to piracy. And of course, his final battle was in 1718 when Virginia Governor Spotswood sent Lieutenant Robert Maynard to hunt him down. He died in a fierce hand-to-hand battle at the Ocracoke Inlet in North Carolina after receiving multiple wounds, and thus his end happened. But let's dive a little deeper. Edward Teach, born in 1680, better known as Blackbeard the Pirate, English pirate, operated in the West Indies and the eastern coast of Britain's North American colonies. We don't know too much about his early life, but he was a sailor on privateering ships in Queen Anne's War, and then settled onto the Bahamian island of New Providence, which was a base for Captain Benjamin Hornigold, whose crew Teach joined. Hornigold placed him in command of a sloop that he had captured, and the two engaged in numerous acts of piracy. Their numbers were boosted by the addition to their fleet of 2 more ships, one of which commanded by Stede Bonnet, a name that you really do need to remember, because he was a gentleman pirate, a very interesting fellow indeed, and we will get to him in due course. But Hornigold retired from piracy towards the end of 1717, my apologies, my reading is awful. Taking 2 vessels with him. Spooky! Welcome, welcome. We've just started and we are doing Edward Teach, better known as Blackbeard. How are you doing, sir?
Okay. Yeah, Blackbeard. He was in Pirates of the Caribbean.
Blackbeard was a very real man. And yes, he was one of the genuine pirates of the Caribbean. And one of the most terrifying, if not one of the most brutal. Very interesting man.
Well, he had a sword that I think... I'm not sure. Okay, never mind.
Well, the stories about him and his weaponry definitely were added to and grew, because he really was one of those larger-than-life people in a great many ways. But the actual history is pretty impressive nevertheless. So he started his own career as a pirate after working with Hornigold, who retired from piracy at the end of 1770. And Teach captured a French slave ship called La Concorde and renamed her Queen Anne's Revenge, equipped her with 40 guns, and crewed her with over 300 men. Now, he was called Blackbeard because he was a huge man, very tall, very broad, and he had this massive, thick black hair and a massive black beard. So a very menacing appearance. And he would take slow matches, basically a fuse, that burned fairly slowly, and weave them into the beard and under his hat and light them. So he was always surrounded by this spitting cloud of sparks and smoke, which made him look like the devil himself had arrived. So a truly terrifying guy with a bandolier of flintlock pistols and his great big cutlass that he would use. He formed an alliance of pirates and blockaded the port of Charleston in South Carolina, ransoming its entire set of inhabitants. He then ran Queen Anne's Revenge aground in a sandbar near Beaufort. He parted company with Stede Bonnet, another fellow that was quite important, and settled in Bath, offered a pardon, which he accepted, which is very strange for a pirate. But, well, let's just say that he couldn't take the boredom, because he was soon back at sea and attracted the attention of Alexander Spotswood, the governor of Virginia. Spotswood arranged for a party of soldiers and sailors to capture him, and on the 22nd of November 1718, following a ferocious battle at Ocracoke, Teach and several of his crew were killed by a small force of sailors led by Robert Maynard. Teach was a shrewd and calculating leader that didn't really use much violence, instead relying on his fearsome image to elicit the response he desired from those whom he robbed. He was much romanticized after his death and became the inspiration for a great many archetypal pirates in works of fiction in many genres. We know that he was between 35 and 40 at the time of his death, so quite a young fellow. Now, some say that he might not have been Edward Teach, but Edward Thatch. It's not entirely certain, and newspapers did show some discrepancies, but they often got things wrong. He's remembered mostly as Teach. Most of the people that wrote in the newspapers hadn't actually met him at all. So it could have been something in that general vicinity, but there's no real certainty. We do know that pirates habitually use fictitious surnames, so not to tarnish the family name or to escape afterwards. So we don't really know what his real name ever actually was. We know that there was a rapid expansion in the 18th century because of the American colonies, and of course the Atlantic slave trade made Bristol a very important international seaport. So he probably was raised in what was then the second largest city in England. He could read and write, which most people couldn't. He communicated with merchants even, and upon his death he had in his possession a letter addressed to him by the Chief Justice and Secretary of the province of Carolina, Tobias Knight. Author Robert Lee speculated that he may in fact have been born to a very respectable, wealthy family and could have come to the Caribbean on a merchant vessel even. We're not really certain exactly where this came about, but we do know that in his life as a pirate, he made a name, and it is said he might have been one of the few pirates who genuinely made people walk the plank, which of course is a particular trope in pirate stories, but wasn't generally used much at all by the pirates in real life. Now, we know that one pirate, Henry Jennings, and his followers started using the island of New Province as a base of operations because it was within easy reach of the Florida Strait and busy shipping lanes filled with lots of rich merchants. But it had an advantage that you might not realize. You see, ships were built differently, and most of the Royal Navy's vessels couldn't sail there because it was too shallow, which meant that the pirates could use it as a good way to get away, and the Navy vessels generally wouldn't come too near, which helped. Now, we know that in New Province, it was a good place for pirates to have a resting spot. And as we saw in the last live, you needed to be able to make land to get fresh foods and water and things to avoid scurvy. So absolutely an important point. And of course, Teach was one of those who also made it his base. Now, he moved there from Jamaica, along with most privateers who had been involved in the war, and when the war ended and they became useless to the government, well, what could they do but carry on in piracy? So they did, and it was there that he joined Benjamin Hornigold, who was quite a well-known pirate of the time, who also worked out of there, and he gained the captaincy of a ship, which he then used along with Hornigold to get all kinds of different things. And one of the first things that they did get, and this answers a question that you were asking about in the last live spooky, what were they going for? Was it always gold? No. The first things that they got were 120 barrels of flour that were coming out of Havana and 100 barrels of wine coming out of Bermuda. So food and supplies were often as important as any other wealth. So that explains how they managed to sort things out. Now, the problem that the wine barrels gave was that it seems that they were struggling to control their crews, who developed a taste for the Madeira wine, which of course they enjoyed getting very drunk. But it seems that in an effort to control this, they took the entire cargo of wine with the boat that they had taken off, and they sank it with the remaining cargo. Drunk crew, not good on a small ship in the big ocean. Now, it was during this cruise at Hornigold that the earliest report of Teach was made, and he is recorded as a pirate in his own right, in command of a large crew. In a report made by Captain Matthew Munth on an anti-piracy patrol for North Carolina, Teach was described as operating a sloop, 6 guns and about 70 men. So he was already known as being a dangerous person. September of that year, they encountered Steed Bonnet, a landowner and military officer from a wealthy family who also had become a pirate. And Bonnet's crew of 70, reportedly dissatisfied with his command, wanted out. So with Bonnet's permission, Teach took control of the ship, the Revenge, and now he had 3 ships, with Teach on the Revenge, Teach's old sloop, and Hornigold's Ranger. And by October, they had managed to get another boat. So you can see they started growing their force, which was pretty impressive. As a former British privateer, Hornigold only attacked his old enemies, the Spanish, even though after the war it became illegal. But for his crew, the sight of British vessels filled with valuable cargo passing by unharmed became too much. And so at some point, at the end of 1717, they actually demoted him. We don't know if Teach had any involvement in the decision, but Hornigold gave up piracy, and he took one of his other sloops and the Ranger and left, leaving Teach, the remaining sloop, and the Revenge, and they never met again. Hornigold accepted the king's pardon. But of course what it meant, and this mattered, was that Teach was now free, and he could do what he wanted. And do it he did. November of 1770, Teach's 2 ships attacked a French merchant vessel off the coast of Saint Vincent, and they fired broadside across its bulwarks, killing several of the crew and forcing the captain to surrender. The ship was La Concorde, a large French Guineaman registered in Saint-Malo, carrying a cargo of slaves. The ship had originally been the English merchantman, but the French had captured it. So you can see that there wasn't happiness on the seas between all the countries. And of course, it then changed several times by the time that Teach got their hands on it, where they disembarked her crew and cargo and converted the ship for their own use. Teach putting on the 40 guns. Now, they renamed this ship Mauvaise Rencontre, Bad Meeting, and sailed for Martinique. And he may have recruited even some of the slaves, but the rest were actually set free on an island, but were later recaptured. Tough luck on them. Teach immediately then renamed the ship again to Queen Anne's Revenge, put in the guns, and placed his Lieutenant Richards in charge of Bonnet's Revenge. And by late November of the same year, near Saint Vincent, he attacked the Great Allen. After lengthy engagement, he forced the large, well-armed merchant ship to surrender and ordered her to move closer to the shore, disembarked her crew and emptied her cargo holds, and then burned and sank the vessel. Now, of course, this caused huge terror, and the Boston Newsletter chronicled the whole thing and called Teach the commander of a French ship of 32 guns, a brigantine of 10 guns, and a sloop of 12. Now, we're not sure where the extra 10 guns and extra ship came from, but clearly it caused enough panic among people to make everybody really sit up and take notice of him. And he obviously realized it, because from then on he started really working on the terror and fear. We know that he stopped the merchant ship Margaret off the coast of Crab Island near Agulha, and her captain Henry Bostock and crew remained Teach's prisoners for 8 hours and were forced to watch as their ship was ransacked. Bostock, who had been held aboard Queen Anne's Revenge, was returned unharmed and allowed to leave with his crew, which was somewhat typical of Blackbeard. He returned to his base of operations in St. Christopher's Island and reported the matter to Governor Walter Hamilton and requested to sign an affidavit about the encounter with Teach and the commanding vessels he had. The captain believed that Teach carried gold dust and silver and a very fine cup taken from the commander of the Great Allen. So now it sort of proved that he was the one responsible for all the attacks. So his reputation started growing again and again. And they then planned that with that, they would sail to Hispaniola in the South Americas, an island off the coast, and lie in wait for the Spanish Armada, which they expected to arrive with enough money to pay all the garrisons. So now they were after money. But at the time, seemingly unsurprised, Bostock told Teach about a pardon for all pirates if they would cease, which it seemed he knew about somehow already, and you wonder how. So he clearly was connected and knew more than people said. Now, Bostock describes Blackbeard and why he was called Blackbeard, a tall, spare man with a very black beard, which he wore very long. Thick black beard braided into pigtails, sometimes tied with coloured ribbons. Such a figure the imagination cannot form an idea of, a fury from hell to look more frightful. So apparently he made a very powerful impression. We know then that he was a clever man. He understood how to play the game, and he made sure that he did. He was tall, broad-shouldered. He wore knee-length boots and dark clothing topped with a wide hat and a long coat of brightly coloured silk or velvet, and sometimes would wear a sling over his shoulders with 3 brace of pistols, that's 6 pistols, hanging in holsters like bandoliers, and he stuck lighted slow matches beneath his hat to emphasize the fearsome appearance that he wished to present to his enemies. But there are no verified accounts of him, despite this horror, of him actually murdering or harming those he held captive. It's possible that he did have other aliases that he used sometimes, but we're not sure. We do know that he was very, very good at what he did, and he took quite a lot of gold. Now, what's quite important about the taking of the gold is that eventually, before he was taken down and killed, he docked at a particular harbour down the coast, and spies reported that the gold was on his ship. But when his ship was taken up near the next harbour, it was empty, and all the gold was hidden. And to this day, it has never been found, which is pretty damned cool and very piratey. Now, we do know that he just grew and grew, and became more and more powerful, which is quite interesting. We know at some point he took on board, as part of his crew, 2 young boys, one of whom was called Bonnie, and the other was called Reed. And of course, you probably recognize those names and realized immediately that the 2 young boys were in fact not boys. And according to legend, how true that is, I suppose, is up for question, but they both fell in love with Edward Teach and eventually fought a duel over who got to have him, where in the duel they realized, hang on, you're a woman. And it was then that they started working together, Anne Bonny and Mary Read, and eventually came out to Edward Teach, who didn't, surprisingly, chuck them off his ship as any woman should be. And eventually when he was killed in battle, they weren't. And the reason they were not hung for piracy is because they received the pregnancy pardon. They were both pregnant and therefore could not be executed, but they were kept for the rest of their lives under house arrest. But if they knew where his treasure was, they never told. And we will get to Anne Bonny and Mary Read in due course, but not yet. We do know that at a point there was a problem that he faced when, unfortunately, they needed medical assistance, and he took some people from the Crowley prisoner and informed them that he needed medical supplies from the colonial government of South Carolina, and that if none were forthcoming, they would execute all of them and send their heads to the governor, and all captured ships would be burnt to the water. Now, the governor agreed to Teach's demands, and Mr. Marks and 2 pirates were given 2 days to collect the drugs. He moved his fleet and the captured ships to within 5 or 6 leagues from land, and 3 days later a messenger sent by Marks returned to the fleet. Mark's boat had capsized and delayed their arrival in Charleston. So very fairly, Teach granted a reprieve of 2 days, but the party still did not come. So he called a meeting with his fellow sailors, moved 8 ships into the harbour, causing panic within the town. When Marks finally returned to the fleet, he explained what happened. On his arrival, he presented the pirates' demands for medication, and that had been gathered. But the 2 pirates sent to escort him couldn't be found because they'd gone off and got drunk. Well, Teach kept to his side of the bargain and released the captured ships and the prisoners, though he did relieve them of any valuables, but took the medication and went off. So he was a fair man, a good man, and generally not a violent man, unlike many pirates, though he could be fairly awful when he really did need to. Whilst in Charleston, though, Teach learnt that a certain Woodes Rogers had left England with several man-of-wars, huge fighting ships, with orders to purge the West Indies of pirates. So they sailed north along the Atlantic coast to Beaufort Island, which was then known as Topsail Inlet, which is pretty damn cool right there. Huge thanks for those likes. I do appreciate that very, very much. So they intended to careen their ships and scrape the hulls. So basically what happens is, and I believe it happens on modern ships too, you get barnacle buildup, which is hell for sailing ships. So you have to bring them onto land and scrape them all down every now and then, which is a major job. Now, Queen Anne's Revenge ran aground on a sandbar and cracked her mainmast, severely damaging many of her timbers. So they threw ropes across the flagship in an attempt to free her, but one of their other ships also ran aground. So they became damaged beyond repair, leaving only the Revenge and a captured Spanish sloop. So it seemed that he had a major setback, but it was at this time that the royal pardon was offered. And, well, you know, the pardon was open to anyone who surrendered on or before 5th of September 1718, but it was only offered to those against crimes committed before the 5th of January. So they had still the risk of being hanged for their actions at Charleston Bar, but the authorities could waive such conditions, and Teach thought that Charles Eden was a man he could trust but wanted to make sure. So he waited to see what would happen to another captain. Bonnet left on a small sailing boat for Boston, where he surrendered to Governor Eden and got his pardon. So he then went back to Beaufort Inlet to collect the Revenge and the remainder of his crew, and intended to sail to St. Thomas Island to receive a commission. Unfortunately, Teach had stripped his vessel of all its valuables and provisions and marooned its crew. So Bonnet set out for revenge, but couldn't find Teach. So his crew returned to piracy, and of course, as you can imagine, not long after that, they were caught, tried, and hanged in Charleston. So much for old Bonnet. Now, Robert Lee, the author, surmised that Teach and Hans, yes, if you've read Treasure Island, one of the crew is known as Hans, and he was a real person. And it is thought that the famous pirate of the story is based almost entirely on Edward Teach. So there you go. Pieces of 8. Though it's never said that old Teach had a parrot, which is kind of sad. But he could well have been Long John Silver. at least in the imagination of Robert Lee. So during the trial of Bonnet's crew, the boatswain Ignatius Pell testified that the ship was run ashore and lost, which Teach caused to be done. Lee considered it plausible that Teach let Bonnet in on his plan to accept a pardon, and that he suggested Bonnet do the same, as war between the Quadruple Alliance and Spain was threatening, in order to then take advantage of getting a privateer's commission. So it seems that Teach was playing a game, and he started to realize that Queen Anne's Revenge was a liability. So maybe it would be a good idea for them to disappear and well-recognized vessels not be around. So it seems he was being clever. Now, before he sailed northward to Orikoke Inlet, Teach marooned about 25 men on a small island 5 kilometers from the mainland, and he may have done this to stifle any protest they made. If they guessed their captain's plans, it would not have gone well. Bonnet rescued them 2 days later, and I suspect Teach knew that he would. So Teach continued on to Bath, where Bonnet had received his pardon, and his much reduced crew got the pardon that he had planned all along. And of course he kept all the money. We're just mentioning that as a point of fact. And he settled down, apparently giving up a life of crime. He married the daughter of a local plantation owner, apparently, and he was given the permission to sail to St. Thomas to seek a commission as a privateer. So it was one of the ways that stopped people going back to piracy, because they were used to a life of action and could be troublesome. So better you directed their energy, if that makes sense. And that's how the government viewed it. So he went on off to get the job, which he did. But by the end of August, he was back as a pirate, and the governor of Pennsylvania issued a warrant for his arrest. But by then, Teach was probably operating in Delaware Bay, some distance away. He took 2 French ships leaving the Caribbean, moved one crew across the other, and sailed the remaining ship back to Ocracoke. He told Eden that he had found the French ship at sea deserted. The vice admiral convened a court and presided it over with Tobias Knight, the collector of customs, and the ship was judged as a derelict found at sea, lies, and the cargo of 20 hogsheads of sugar were awarded to Knight and 60 to Eden, and everything else was given to Teach and his crew. So he was playing games. He was playing games hard, and he was winning. So he carried on, and he did more, a lot more. Israel Hands and Robert Deal, another famous pirate, went along with Teach, but it was interesting to note his old pirate friend that had taught him the ways of piracy, Benjamin Hornigold, had now become a pirate hunter. Well, the news of Teach and his company spread, and they sent out ships from Pennsylvania to capture the pirates, but they failed. But then the governor of Virginia, Alexander Spotswood, stepped in, and he was also very concerned that somebody as notorious as Teach was near North Carolina. So they decided they would make a proclamation that all former pirates must make themselves known to authorities, to give up their arms, and never travel in groups larger than 3. Spotswood viewed this as being the right way forward. He didn't think much of Carolina and thought that they were a back-alley bunch of useless idiots that would never manage to control the pirates, and he would have to do things. So he found out that William Howard, the former quartermaster of Queen Anne's Revenge, was in the area, and believing that he might know of Teach's whereabouts, he had him and his 2 slaves arrested. Now, Spotswood had no legal authority to have pirates tried, and as a result, Howard's attorney brought the charges against Captain Brand, where Howard was imprisoned, and got damages of as much as £500 for wrongful arrest, which was quite a lot of money in those days. So the games were on. And of course it went back and forth and so on and so forth. Accusations of this, accusations of that. None of it really seemed to work terribly well. So eventually, after much and much, Teach buggered off, and nobody knew where he was. He was out doing his thing, being clever, and really doing the sort of things that everybody wanted him not to do. Well, eventually, it was put out there that the Crown might benefit financially from Teach's capture, and Spotswood personally financed the operation to get him, believing that Teach had fabulous treasures hidden away, which he probably did. And he sent a number of captains to their ships to get involved and get this guy, one of which was Robert Maynard of the HMS Pearl. And he was given command of 2 commandeered sloops as well. And they went off to where Teach was said to probably be. And along with that, there was a large reward put in from the Assembly of Virginia over and above what the Crown offered for Teach's capture. So they obviously were terrified of him, and a lot of money was involved. Now, as they went in, Maynard and his detachment from the Pearl took the larger of the 2 vessels and went off after Teach. Interestingly, that one of the main officers in this was Mr. Hyde. And one gets all kinds of fantasy ideas of a Jekyll and Hyde captain. That would be one hell of a story. But nevertheless, he was a real man and he wasn't the Jekyll and the Hyde. But they went on to Bath to try and find Teach. But Teach was not there, but he was expected. They sent canoes down to the Ocracoke Inlet, where Teach was known to sea, and what they found was he was. Maynard found the pirates anchored on the inner side of Ocracoke Island on the evening of the 21st of November. He asserted their position from ships he had stopped along the journey, and being unfamiliar with the local channels and shoals, he decided to wait until morning to make his attack. He stopped all traffic from entering the inlet, preventing any warning of his presence, and posted a lookout on both sloops to ensure Teach could not escape to sea. On the other side of the island, Teach was having a party and had not set lookout. When Israel Hands, ashore in Bath, was with about 24 of the sailors of the ship and a much reduced crew, it was reported that Teach had no more than 25 men on board, so a much easier target. He gave out to all the vessels that he spoke with that day that he had 40. 13 white and 6 Negroes was their number, later reported. So there you are. Not as many people as he pretended. Of course, the battle was joined. They went in and there was an exchange of small arms fire, following which the Adventure ran aground on a sandbar. Maynard anchored and then lightened his ship to pass over the obstacle. The Adventure eventually turned her guns on the two ships and fired broadside, and the broadside was devastating. In an instant, Maynard lost as much as a third of his forces from the broadside from the pirate, and about 20 were wounded or killed, and 9 on his other ship. Hyde was dead, and his second and third officers were either dead or incapacitated. His sloop was so badly damaged that it was out of the fight. Contemporary accounts then say a lot of things that were confusing, but small arms fire from the guys trying to get Teach cut the Adventure's jib sheet, causing her to lose control and run aground. So in the aftermath of Teach's overwhelming attack, they were basically stuffed. Maynard had kept many of his men below deck, though, in anticipation of being boarded, and told them to prepare for close fighting. Teach watched as the gap between the vessels closed, and as it came to, the two vessels contacted one another as the Adventure's grappling hooks hit their target, and several grenades and shot-filled bottles and ignited, basically homemade hand grenades, were flung onto the deck. As the smoke cleared, Teach led his men aboard, buoyed by the sight of Maynard's mostly empty ship, firing at men with his pistols and shouting. Then, of course, all the rest of the men burst from the hold, shouting and firing back. The plan to surprise Teach and his crew worked. The pirates were taken aback at the assault. Teach rallied his men, and the two groups fought across the deck in real pirate style, until the deck was so slick with blood that you could barely stand. Maynard and Teach fired their flintlocks at each other, and Maynard managed to hit Teach, but Teach missed. Flintlocks are terrible firearms, by the way. They really don't work terribly well. They're not accurate at all. They then drew their cutlasses, dropped the flintlocks, and joined the battle. Teach broke Maynard's cutlass at the hilt. Against superior training and advantage in numbers, though, the pirates were pushed back towards the bow. Following the Jane's crew to allowing the Jane's crew to surround Maynard and Teach, who was by then completely isolated, he did not give up and was about to give a killing blow to Maynard, but was slashed across the neck by one of Maynard's men. This redirected Teach's cutlass to strike Maynard's knuckles instead of killing him. Badly wounded, Teach was then attacked and killed by several more of Maynard's crew. Bit unfair, I suppose, but hey, battle's battle. The remaining pirates then surrendered, and varying responses as to what the final tally was have been given. Maynard reported 8 of his men and 12 pirates were killed. Brand reported that 10 pirates and 11 of Maynard's men were killed. Spotswood claimed that 10 pirates and 10 of the king's men were dead. Maynard afterwards examined Teach's body and noted that it had been shot 5 times and cut about 20. He found several letters on his corpse, and the corpse was thrown into the inlet, and his head was suspended from the bowsprit of Maynard's sloop, so the reward could be collected. On their return to Virginia, the head was placed on a pole at the entrance to Chesapeake Bay as a warning to other pirates and a greeting to ships, and apparently it stayed there for several years, which is pretty awful if you think about it. And that was the story of Edward Teach, a terrifying fellow in every respect. So what do you think of Edward Teach, the scariest of the pirates, though not the nastiest? Now, as we get going again, you have a comment for me. Spooky, do talk, do tell. After we fix TikTok's belief that nobody's here. Good Lord. There we go. What do you think of Edward Teach?
It's half a story, probably.
Well, I suspect there was a lot more involved than anybody said, and the legends have grown with the telling. But he was real, and he was a pirate, and he did get killed as a pirate. So there's that at least. Now, he is in quite contrast to the next pirate, who also was a pirate of the Caribbean, a genuine one, who was known as the gentleman's pirate, which is kind of interesting. But yes, there are a lot of stories, and I do believe that Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island definitely took some stories about Edward Teach to add to the mythos. I strongly suspect. But what about a gentleman pirate? He was a moderately wealthy landowner before he turned to a life of crime, born into a wealthy English family on the island of Barbados, and inherited the family estate. Despite his lack of sailing experience, he decided to turn to piracy and bought himself a pirate ship, which he called the Revenge. And he traveled with his crew up the eastern seaboard of the United States, capturing various vessels and burning other Barbadian ships. He was, of course, Stede Bonnet. He set sail for Nassau in the Bahamas to the haven of pirates known as the Republic of Pirates, but was seriously wounded en route during an encounter with a Spanish warship. So after Nassau, he met up with none other than Blackbeard, and incapable of leading his crew, he temporarily ceded his ship's command to Blackbeard. Blackbeard and Bonnet plundered and captured merchant ships all along the east coast, and after Bonnet failed to capture the Protestant Caesar, his crew abandoned him to join Blackbeard aboard Queen Anne's Revenge. Bonnet stayed on Blackbeard's ship as a guest, but did not command a crew again until 1718, when he was pardoned, and he got his pardon and received clearance to undertake privateering against the Spanish. He was tempted to go back to piracy, but didn't want to lose his pardon. So he took the alias Captain Thomas and changed the ship's name to the Royal James, and he was back at piracy. He anchored the Royal James on an estuary in the Cape Fear River to careen and repair the ship. But then, of course, came Robert Johnson's naval expedition against pirates on the river, and Rhett and Bonnet's men engaged in combat for hours apparently, but the pirates were outnumbered and surrendered, and they were taken to Charleston in South Carolina in early October. Bonnet escaped, but was soon recaptured. He was brought to trial and charged with 2 acts of piracy and sentenced to death. He wrote to ask for clemency, but the judge's decision was upheld and he was hanged. So he tried very hard. He wasn't terribly good at it, and he died, as many of them did. And of course, Teach had pretty much screwed him over. So less famous perhaps than you might think. But what about Mary Read? Mary Read might refer to 2 women, in fact, which confuses things if you ever try and Google it. So Mary Read, from 1854 to 1943, was a Methodist missionary who worked in a leprosy home in India. Not her. We're interested in Mary Read, 1685 to 1721, who sailed with Anne Bonny and, terrible mistake on my part right there, not Blackbeard, but Calico Jack. I mix the two sometimes. Red Rackham, the famous Red Rackham, though he did have a great deal of money as well and was just as terrifying. So the pirate, born in England, disguised as a boy after birth to secure an inheritance, and grew up living as a male. Nobody knew. She served in the military and worked on the ships, and eventually became a pirate in the West Indies. She sailed with Anne Bonny and Calico Jack Rackham, and was apparently so good at pretending to be a man that nobody caught on, and was incredibly fierce. Now, apparently she was one of the ones who used to shoot captains for fun. Now, while she escaped prison because of pregnancy, apparently she escaped execution, she did die in prison before giving birth, which is kind of sad. Because after all, we do like serious pirates, which is a lot more exciting. So she served under John Rackham, who we will talk about, of course, alongside Anne Bonny. They were genuine pirates of the Caribbean, which is very, very interesting. The first real information about her comes from much later in Captain Charles Johnston's book from 1724. So she was born in England, raised as a boy, and joined the military as a boy, unknown to everybody else that she wasn't, apparently. At an unknown date, she travelled to the Bahamas, where she became acquainted with John Rackham and joined his crew alongside another one who was said to be a boy. They got the sloop, the William, owned by a fellow from Nassau, and they carried out a whole ton of attacks on merchant ships in the West Indies until they were captured by former privateer Jonathan Barnett following a brief naval engagement near Jamaica. Rackham, with all of the male crew members, were tried, sentenced, and executed. But at this convenient time, Reed and Bonny said, "Surprise! We're girls and we're pregnant." So they didn't get executed. We don't quite know what Anne Bonny's fate was, but Mary Read died imprisoned in Spanish Town of an unknown cause. We don't know exactly the place and date of her birth. Nothing really definitive is known about her. There are suspicions that her father might have been a pirate as well, and she followed on. We're not sure. So there were varying stories, none of which can be proved. All that can be proved is that Reed's mother married a sailor with whom she had a son. Her husband went on a sea voyage and, as many did, never returned. Despite lacking a husband, she became pregnant again. So to avoid bearing an illegitimate child, she moved to the countryside, but the boy didn't live long and died in infancy. But she then gave birth to Mary. When she ran out of money, she turned to her late husband's mother for support. But in order to trick her, she dressed Mary in boy's clothes and pretended that she was the deceased brother. The deception worked, and the mother-in-law gave money every week until eventually she herself died. So it worked. So they said, well, this works. So she made the girl stay a boy, and she became a footboy for a French lady. But there, soon after, Reed's mother died. Reed was not interested in being a footboy and joined the crew of an English man-of-war and moved into Flanders, where she carried arms in a regiment as a cadet and served bravely, but couldn't get promotion because in those days, if you wanted promotion, you had to buy it. And she had no money. Still a boy, she got involved in varying other wars, but unfortunately fell in love with a Flemish soldier, and they married and bought an inn named the Three Horseshoes in the Netherlands, apparently. Then her husband died, and there was no way to sort of get things going. So she left the military and went to the West Indies to find money. Now, their ship was boarded by pirates, and disguised as a man, Reed joined the pirates, remembering, of course, that women were not allowed on ships, except in special occasions as passengers and must stay below and not get involved. So everyone thought she was still a man. Reed then met John Rackham, and we're not quite sure how quickly he discovered she was a woman. It's a bit confusing, but Reed and Rackham and Bonny and a dozen other pirates stole a ship and put to sea and spent months in the West Indies making a huge amount of money. Eventually, there was a call for the arrest of Rackham and his associates, including Reed and Bonney. General history claims Bonney eventually fell in love with Reed, only to discover she was a woman. This caused jealousy with Rackham, who suspected romantic involvement, and Bonney told him that Reed was a woman and swore him to secrecy, but that seems to be a bit of a story around whether or not it really was. What we do know is that the three did stick together and carried pistols and machetes, and they cursed and swore at the men, and that they were really quite violent. We know that when they caught people, Mary Reed would put the captain against the mast and, using the terribly inaccurate flintlock pistols, would practice shooting. If you survived, she'd let you go. But nobody knew how long she was going to keep firing. So, as you can imagine, it might have been a little bit of a cheat. So, yeah, didn't go down so well. But they were eventually caught and brought to trial in Spanish Town, Jamaica, sentenced to hang for acts of piracy. And the great Red Rackham was going to be ended. Now, amongst all of them, they were all executed except for Reed and Bonney. We know that Reed died in prison, and the cause of her death is unknown, but possibly fever. And she was buried in St. Catherine's Parish. So there you go. That was the end. And she is among the most famous because, well, there was no way in this day that a woman could ever do any of the things that she did. And she absolutely did, which made her way more amazing than today would understand. She was very much the favorite of the two, though. Reed was always popular and Bonney not so for some reason, and we're not really sure why. It's possible that Reed and Bonney were in a relationship and knew each other was a woman, but wouldn't have been spoken of, because if it did happen, that really would have been considered awful at this time, and would never have been allowed. So who's to say? Not me, at least. Now, Anne Bonney was an Irish girl who sailed with Calico Jack, Red Rackham, born Anne Cormac, a fiery figure who defied convention, fought alongside Mary Reed, and those captured and sentenced to hang. Her pregnancy saved her. So she was born in Kinsdale Island to William Cormac, a lawyer of all things, and his maid. So illegitimate. And again, in order to hide these things, her father disguised her as a boy, Andy, and they quickly moved to the American colonies. After her mother's death, William became a successful merchant in Charleston, and as things progressed, Anne grew and became a woman again, and married the sailor James Bonney. But her father disowned her, so they went to Nassau, which at the time was a pirate haven, where she met Calico Jack Rackham. Unfortunately, her husband became an informant for the governor. This annoyed her. So she basically let James Bonney go his way, put on some men's clothes, and joined Rackham's crew. She was known for her ferocity in battle, was terribly aggressive, and violent. And yeah, fought alongside Mary in a great many terrifying manners because she could, and was pretty damn impressive about it. But of course, in the end, she did not survive. She probably died in prison. She lived longer than Mary Read, we know that. She certainly lived longer than Red Rackham, which is kind of sad. She was mentioned at a number of times by varying, I've got dry eyes tonight, by a number of people. And she was absolutely famous. And she has been one of the ones, at the very least, who've inspired stories, which is pretty cool. How many of the stories are true? We're not sure. We do know that she was said to be the sort of person that when angered, she would really go nuts. Somebody was rude to her, a maid, and she stabbed them to death with a knife. He also says that at one stage a man tried to rape her, and she beat him so severely that he was near dead. So there you go. Truly a fairly violent Irish girl, but perfectly suitable for being a pirate in the Caribbean. Let's say it. All we can say is that Anne Bonny were frightening alongside Mary, and their use of the machete in combat meant that, well, they probably were pretty gruesome in battle as well. Which leaves us only with John Rackham. Good old Red Rackham, Calico Jack as he was known. I'm not entirely sure why Calico Jack, whose career was bright and exciting and fairly short. Calico Jack is a name that he received after his death. And he's probably the only pirate to have female crew members. We don't know how he got to be a pirate. We know that Jack Rackham, or Red Rackham, was there. He was probably English, and it is an English name, the Rackhams, coming from the place, Rackham, in England. So there is that. He claimed at one point that he was from Cuba, but what that means, anybody guess. There are no description of Rackham and what he wore or anything like that, no physical descriptions, no mention of age or national origin. Claims that he wore calico comes from afterwards and is not provable, but it gave him his nickname. And by and large, the important thing about John Rackham is that he had with him Mary Read and Anne Bonny. They were very good pirates, but they were also very violent. And the final result was that they were hunted down hard and were executed. So there you go. That was sort of him and not much more. He was less important as other pirates. Alongside that, we have specialists, one of which was rather clever. So he was never really a pirate. He was a dodgy bugger, but he was a privateer. So he would only have been considered a pirate by the Spanish. He was an explorer. And we talk, of course, of Sir Francis Drake from 1540 to much later than that. They don't give an end there. Born in 1540, died in 1596 at the age of 56. There you go. He came from Tavistock, Devon. He is best known for making the second circumnavigation of the world in a single expedition, which is the first English expedition to accomplish this, which is pretty impressive. He did involve himself in a number of English slaving voyages, and his cousins were also seamen and involved in this. And he fought against the Spanish Armada as a vice admiral, which is pretty cool. So a fairly decent fellow. He was put into the household of a relative, William Hawkins, and I put it to you, what was the name of the cabin boy on the Hispaniola in Treasure Island? Yes, it was Hawkins. So you can see where the names and the stories and the people were got for that fictional story. Treasure Island was based on real people, because William Hawkins was a prominent sea captain in Plymouth. And of course, eventually, Drake began to do sailing too. And he set off on his circumnavigation of the world in 1577. And he crossed the Pacific, an area that was wholly Spanish at the time, laid claim to New Albion, plundering coastal towns and ships for treasure and supplies as he went, and then eventually got back to England in 1580, and Elizabeth I gave him a knighthood. So he used this to get his galleon, the Golden Hind. All very exciting and dramatic. And then, of course, the Anglo-Spanish War began. And so he was in command of an expedition to the Americas that started attacking the Spanish. And when Philip II of Spain sent the Spanish Armada to England as a precursor to his invasion, Drake was second in command to the English fleet that fought against and repulsed the Spanish fleet. And a year later, he led the English Armada in a failed attempt to destroy the rest of the Spanish fleet. He was a member of Parliament for 3 constituencies, which is quite impressive, and a hero of the English. But the Spanish called him a pirate and called him El Drac, the dragon. Unfortunately, he died of dysentery in 1596, and that was the end of that. But he absolutely was one of the most famous of the early pirates of the Caribbean, and probably inspired a great many of them because of the great wealth that he did get, because he absolutely was an excellent privateer. So a hero to inspire pirates in many ways, even though he himself wasn't quite a pirate. And of course involved in the time with all the skullduggery that went on in the getting of much wealth which the Drakes kept. We do know that these pirates were not the only ones. And while all of this was going on in the Caribbean, there were a lot of other places where important pirates were happening. And of course, the African coast was a very important place, though there generally it was the Muslims who were pirates or privateers from the Barbary coast, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya, who between the 16th and 19th centuries terrorized European shipping and raided coastal towns, capturing slaves, plundering goods, usually under the authority of the Ottoman Empire, who had become a significant naval power that forced European nations to pay tribute for safe passage. These two that are pretty cool operated from ports like Algiers, Tunisia, Tripoli, and Rabat. They were called pirates by their enemies, of course, but they worked as state-sanctioned privateers, holding letters of marque from the Ottoman rulers that legitimized what they did, as long as they attacked Christian shipping. The Barbary corsairs were quite a few different people, and they were exiles that had become Muslim, such as Murad Reis, who originally was Jan Jansen. They made their attacks, they made their money, and among them there were the great heroes, just as Blackbeard was a great hero of the British pirates. These guys had their heroes too, including the Barbarossa brothers, which is pretty cool indeed. Urus Reis and Hayreddin Barbarossa, legendary Ottoman pirates, or corsairs as they were known. And in the 16th century, they were the most terrifying. They were called the Barbarossa brothers because their beard, Barbar, was red, rosa. So yeah, that's how they got their name. The Redbeard brothers, ruthless seafaring, powerful figures that eventually really rose up in the Ottoman Empire. Hayreddin became Grand Admiral. But they started as privateers, attacking Christian ships, rescuing Muslims, and established a rule in Algiers, bringing it under Ottoman control, solidifying their legacy as formidable figures against European powers, especially Spain. Seems Spain got attacked by everyone. Urus Reis, the elder brother, Baba Urus, Father Urus, the one most known as Barbarossa, bold corsair, became the first Sultan of Algiers, but died in battle in 1518, and his younger brother, Hayreddin Barbarossa, who inherited his brother's nickname and fame, and eventually received the honorary name of Khair al-Din, goodness of the faith. And he became an admiral serving Kapudan Pasha, the Grand Admiral, and achieving major naval victories, such as the Battle of Preveza. Now, they were born on Lesbos. Yes, Lesbos in Greece, to a Turkic father and a Greek mother. They captured Algiers, they served them in the Ottoman Navy, and they were pirates, which is pretty damned cool. Now, just pulling up my notes, which is being slow again. What we do know about them is they were good at their job. That was their point. That was what they did. Now, I find it very interesting is Jorge Barbosa is there. And I wonder if Barbossa is not in any way related to Barbarossa. It's an interesting thought, is it not? Now, as we've got so many freaking insects in the house lately. We know the famous one was Hayresin, because, well, in short, he lived longer than his brother, who would have been the most important had he lived longer. The problem was that his brother died early in battle. So Barbarossa, the goodness of the faith, or the best of the faith, terrifying in battle, a great fighter, and again, against the stories you see on TV, not one ship, not a single vessel, but a fleet. You needed a fleet, quite simply because he conquered Tunisia. He achieved a decisive victory over the Holy League at Provencia. He had joint campaigns with the French and eventually retired to Constantinople in 1545, where he died, but not as a pirate, which is pretty good for most of these guys. It is very interesting to note that he was part Greek, and part Turkish. It's strange to think of, to those of us who haven't really looked at the geography or know the geography around there, and realized how close all these places are, and how the varying politics and history has affected the different places around there as well. It's quite interesting in that regard. All we really know, though, besides their great successes and fame, is that they really did have big red beards, which most others wouldn't have, but because of their mixed heritage, they did, and therefore they stood out, which made them quite interesting. We know that the depictions and stories are not very accurate. All we know, though, is that they fought, they won, and they beat the snot out of the Europeans, and helped some of the Europeans, which is quite interesting too. So it goes to show that piracy was an egalitarian sport. Now, one which I rather liked was William Kidd, a Scottish sailor who became a famous privateer and was commissioned to hunt pirates. But let's just say how good he was questionable. In the Indian Ocean, his blurring the lines between privateering and outright piracy led to a trial, conviction for murder, and he was hanged in London. He was one of the real swashbuckling pirates with buried treasure. But it wasn't always that way. He started in New York, and apparently was a very respected sea captain, but greedy. He was born in Scotland, settled in New York, became a privateer against the French with commissions from English governors. In 1596, he received a royal commission, a letter of marque, to hunt pirates in the Indian Ocean, and he took off on the Adventure Galley. But his crew mutinied, and he ended up attacking ships instead, including the Armenian-owned Quetta Merchant. And his capture of this ship with English interests started to blur the lines, and he is accused from then on of being a pirate. He, of course, returned to New York, was arrested, sent to England, tried without counsel, convicted, and very quickly hanged at execution dock. So he was both a symbol of political maneuvering and of piracies, but his legend grew, largely due to the mystery of where did all the money go? So, how much money, and where did it go? William Kidd, Captain Kidd, probably born in Dundee, a New York boy by raising, successful privateer, commissioned to protect English interests in the 13 colonies. Yes, there were 13 colonies in North America, 13 states, not anymore, but swayed by money, sent to hunt down pirates and enemy French ships in the Indian Ocean. With his letter of marque, though, he didn't find very many targets. His crew mutinied, some abandoned him, and he was just like, this is bullshit. Then, the 400-ton Quedagh merchant, captained by an Englishman. Well, the political climate in England had turned against him and denounced him as a pirate. So Bellamont engineered Kidd's arrest on his return and sent him to stand trial. But here's the thing. After that first ship, allegedly, he hit a number of other ships, possibly legitimate ones, and he got a lot of money that he didn't have with him when he went home and became hanged. So, where went the money? We know that they attacked a number of different ships, that they gathered from just one ship, the Marie Galante, £2,000 sterling. So he absolutely made quite a lot of money. It added up. He built it up. He then married Sarah Bradley Cox Oort, a woman who had been the wealthiest widow in New York. And so he got that money too. He was well loved, apparently, and very much a personable person. So people really enjoyed him as a person. He was loved, he was exciting, and a great hero taking out bad pirates. And then suddenly he became one. Now, the letter that he had said that 10% of loot would go to the crown, and the crown would front some money to set the voyage off. But the rest of the things that they got was theirs, and got they did. He chose his own crew, and they went on out. But strange, as they left the Thames, Kidd didn't salute the Navy yacht at Greenwich as custom dictated. The Navy yacht fired a low shot into the water to hey, show respect, whereupon Kidd's crew turned and dropped their trousers and slapped their asses at the Navy yacht, which didn't go down very, very well at all. So Kidd went on, capturing French vessels and so on, and attacking more, and picking up more crew, many of whom were hardened criminals. You wonder if Kidd didn't in fact have a particular plan in mind. Well, probably he did. While he was technically hunting pirates, he was up to other things. We know that they set sail for the Cape of Good Hope, though in the Comores a third of his crew died due to cholera, which was a problem. And he failed to find the pirates that he was expecting to off Madagascar. So that didn't work so well. So he needed to cover his costs. So he thought, well, you know what? Anybody can be a pirate when you're out alone on the ocean, right? And so there they went, taking gold and gold from ships that he shouldn't have actually attacked. This was a problem. We know that there was arguments among them and more, and things weren't necessarily always good on the ship, which was a problem. It resulted in even killing on board a ship. We know from our last lives that killing on board a ship was a giant no, but Kidd did it. And this went down badly and further pushed the upset against Kidd and why he should be arrested. Escaped prisoners said that they were hoisted up by their arms and thrashed with a drawn cutlass by Kidd. Crew members attacked the trading ship Mary and tortured crew members while Kidd conversed quietly. He was declared a full-on pirate, that he was clearly out of hand, which, but late to realize that if you want to go there. And they basically revoked the letter of marque. However, Kidd went ahead and took the Quede Merchant at this point, the Indian ship hired by Armenian merchant, captained by an English captain. There you go. Loaded with satins, muslins, gold, silver, East Indian merchandise, valuable, extremely valuable, silks and more. And they took the lot. But here's the thing. Having taken all of this gold, they went on to Madagascar, where he met up with the trader Tempest Rogers, who was accused of trading and selling Kidd's looted goods. So now he's got a ship full of gold. And he moved on from Madagascar, etc., and went back home. But ship full of gold, got home, no gold. So between Madagascar and home, no gold. Where went Captain Kidd's gold? Nobody knows. And given that he was executed as a pirate, there were all kinds of stories and lost. Some of his treasure ended up on Gardiner's Island. We know that somewhere near Oyster Bay he hid more gold, but we don't know where. I don't find any reference to whether or not they found the gold that he hid on Gardiner Island either. So there you have two, at least, large amounts of gold just missing out there. So, he was gibbeted when hung, which is a rather nasty way of doing things, because basically you're all tied up together and hung as well. A particularly awful version of hanging. He was thoroughly drunk before hanging, however, and they had to hang him twice because the rope broke and Kidd survived, which meant the crowd called for Kidd's release, saying that the breaking rope was a sign from God. But they hung him second time anyway, and then hung his body up at Tilbury Point as a warning. So, yeah, but the fact that you had this dramatic death just added to the story. So, as you can imagine, large amounts of stories, large amounts of all kinds of tales, inspiring huge treasure hunts, including the Oak Island treasure hunts. Yes, it's Kidd's treasure that's supposed to be there. And then more in Nova Scotia and Suffolk County, Long Island, Gardiner's Island, Charles Island in Milford, Connecticut, and the Thimble Islands in Connecticut, and Coconut Island in Westport, Connecticut. So he was also said to have buried treasure on the Rahway River in New Jersey, across the Arthur Kill from Staten Island. So we know he buried a small cache on Gardiner's Island in a spot known as Cherry Tree Field. And eventually at least part of it was found. But that was only a little bit. And there was a great deal more. We know that he had a lot of gold and jewels that he was fairly lavish with when he wanted to be. But he had way, way more. He stopped off and stayed over with a lady at a house where when he left he was supplied with provisions when he was on his way home. And as he left, he made her hold out her apron, which, they said, he filled with gold and jewels as payment for her hospitality. And after her husband died, the lady in question purchased much land with the wealth, which says that she got a lot of money for being nice to William Kidd. So we know that all the rest of the treasure, which was a lot, was just gone. Gone, gone, gone. We don't know where anything else is. We know that he's connected to a massive boulder at the waterfront in Kingsland Point Park in the village of, wait for it, legends again, Sleepy Hollow. And it's called Kidd's Rock. There was a clandestine meeting place around there which apparently people met with Captain Kidd who were very wealthy. Who's to say? People tried to find the Quader merchant. They never did find. They think they may have found something like it, but there was no real wealth on it, so who's to say? It's an interesting thing, but nevertheless, lots and lots and lots of gold. Varying stories about the treasure. Never found. Never ever found. The stories, the stories. Now, of course, in terms of pirates, these are just a few. And they inspired the great stories of the Caribbean pirates. We know that there were many others in other times and places and all over the world, but none of them were as exciting as the Caribbean pirates. So these were the ones that got the name, the old sea dogs that ruled the oceans and terrified everybody and really made the stories. We know that there were far more important people in terms of what was done that never caught the eyes. Thomas Cavendish was the first man to intentionally circumnavigate the globe, but who remembers him? Though he raided a hell of a lot of places on the way. There were lots. There were Dutch, Flemish, and more that went all over. But they are not remembered. They are lost to time because they just weren't that cool. We know that there was a lot of gold that was found as well from this time, which is really quite interesting. And much of it was never discovered. It was hidden out, lost away, in case by the pirates who were then hung, and that money could be anywhere. If you're ever in the Caribbean, there's always a chance that you might find a chest full of treasure. And perhaps that's the thing that really catches the attention. We do know that most pirates were not what you thought in real life, but some were. We know that Cornelius Jol from the Netherlands was a pirate that really did have a wooden peg leg, rather interesting. Who would have thought of that? We know that there were the odd pirate that did have an eye patch, interestingly enough. But most didn't. But then again, injuries were fairly common and medicine was pretty crappy. We know that Jan Mendoza plundered waters between Iceland and Norway and Finnmark and Nordland until he was hunted down and captured by Admiral Jørgen Daa by order of King Christian IV of Denmark, Norway, and executed in Copenhagen. And there at least they got the treasure back. The king recovered 8 chests of gold coins, each chest requiring 10 men to lift it. That's a lot of gold. But yeah, there were a lot of them. Irish, English, Japanese and Chinese, Mussulman and more. Sir Walter Raleigh was one of them, a corsair who searched for the fabled El Dorado in the Spanish colony of Guyana modern-day Venezuela. He never did find it, of course, but he searched. And as a corsair and a privateer, he absolutely would have taken down a few of the Spanish as well. So, yeah, sure. Interesting. But many are forgotten, sadly. There were a number of pirates who are actually scientists. There's one who is credited with having recorded many of the plants and things found in the Caribbean islands, and was considered to be a great scientist. Forgotten now because, well, unfortunately, they also indulged in picking up some extra wealth. I suppose history is not written by the doers, but by the ones that stays at home, which might be a good thing, and it might be a bad thing. But nevertheless, interesting, however, that for all of these pirates, from whatever age, piracy has never stopped. The buccaneers were strong in the 17th century and did amazing things. But we get them today. We were talking the other day, Spooky, were we not, about the pirates that attack cruise liners and take out some good money. And it's arguable that the attacks on ships, alleged drug ships, is a kind of piracy. Who's to say? Well, privateering at the very least. I don't know. What do you think?
The drug ships that goes to America all gets blown up, gets destroyed. So I'm not sure you can count that as piracy because they don't keep it.
Fair point. It's a difficult one to really say, isn't it?
Yeah. So I've got one question. All these pirates, are they educated?
Well, it varied massively. Many of them couldn't even read or write. Some could.
That's what I'm asking.
The ones
Can they read and write, and who wrote their stories?
Usually their enemies, interestingly enough. So, for example, many of the captains were educated if they started as privateers. So, Henry Morgan was a privateer and an upper-class man. So, absolutely, he would have been able to, but the average sailor couldn't. Nicholas Clow, active in the Caribbean and on the coast of Africa, is best remembered by the Articles of Agreement, the very first famous pirate code, which was very important. Edmund Cook, read and write, absolutely. He was interesting. The privateers, yes. But the ones that went straight for piracy, far less so. So John Cornelius, who was an Irish pilot in the Red Sea and the coast of Africa, he was not very clever. But you could always tell who the good ones were because they lasted longer and were far more successful. They were obviously educated enough and were thinkers rather than punch-up fighters, whereas the ones that went straight into piracy tended to be the more punch-up fighter type, and they died fast and hard. So, it varied massively.
What is a privateer's profession?
A privateer is a captain hired by a government, given a letter of marque to attack a specific country's ships. So
Yeah, but what is its profession?
well, keep in mind, during this occasion, they are generally not paid by the government. They are given permission. So they pay the government usually around 10% of what they get. So they are private and independent, though they work on behalf. So it's like a freelance worker. So their actual profession or job is freelance work attacking specific kinds of boats. As opposed to the Navy, which work for the government and are part of the government.
So do they get protection from the government?
They get protection from the government that assigns them the mark, but not from anybody else. So it could be quite dangerous. It's a very interesting situation.
But why does the government only take a little bit?
Mostly because they were private workers. And as we saw, that didn't always work for them, because some of the pirates, which became pirates, did so because when they worked for the Navy doing exactly the same job, they were paid £4 a month and ate crap. When they became a pirate, they could earn upwards of £1,000 a month as a crew member and ate like kings. And they were like, why should we do this for the government when we can do it for ourselves? A very fair point.
Okay, but the government can at least take a little bit more money if the government gives them the intelligence.
Well, the government didn't. The government didn't know what to do about any of it. And they just said, get out there and sort these buggers out, find them and deal with them. And that, in part, was the problem. They had no idea. So they basically released these guys onto the ocean and said, go and sort it out. And of course, it turned back on them and bit them when the people said, we like doing this, and carried on against not just whoever was the flavor of the day, but against everybody.
But still, what exactly?
Everything. Supplies, food, gold, jewels.
Okay, but if the government wants you to go and attack these guys and take their shit, why would the government doesn't want them to have that shit in the first place? That's why they're sending these privateers after them.
Now, remember, the first big reason was the war between Spain and England, and they were both trying to get land in America. In America was a lot of gold, which was then being sent home to finance the wars. So by taking the gold from Spain, Spain couldn't use it to fight against Britain. Later on, when it was between Britain and France, same deal. There was a war back home. Politics absolutely was involved. Furthermore, when you had the issue of the Barbary Corsairs, the way to get money was to get merchants to the Far East and get a lot of spices and silks and all of that. And you had to go around Africa and get home with your stuff. So the Barbary pirates were nicking it. So they wanted to fight against the Barbary pirates so that they could protect the merchant ships. So yes, there was a lot more involved than just I don't like them. No, there were wars at home and politics and more. And they wanted their colonies to succeed. Fresh and new colonies. Now, the Spanish were minting their doubloons from...
Okay, so privateer, they had their own ships, so the government didn't supply them with any equipment or anything.
It was almost always a case of you go do you and give us 10% and we'll give you legal right to do it.
Okay, so they were contractors.
Yes. Now, the important thing about the legal mark meant that as long as you're a privateer for a particular country, you can go to their ports and safely get food and supplies and water. So it was an advantage. And of course, Spain turned things around, and they had their privateers against the English as well. So absolutely, I mean, it went both ways, back and forth and up and down. The problem was when the war between England and Spain stopped, all the privateers were told, you have to stop now. You can't keep doing it. The war's over.
So this is the legalized theft.
Basically. And they became pirates rather than privateers when the government said, no, we've made friends with Spain now, you have to stop. And they were like, and do what? And the government says, we don't care. So they said, fine. In that case, we're going to now get it from everybody. And they became pirates, not privateers.
Well, they would probably become privateers again if
They
paid
were
correctly.
They were offered a chance in some cases, but not in other cases. But the problem as well, if you think about it, is the government really did screw them over. So, fool me
They were
once.
probably stealing from the government themselves.
Well, the government was stealing from them. But, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me.
Yeah, but it backfired, or they were criminals from the start, so they stole from the government anyway. They were doing pirating on their own country.
Not
Well,
all.
they probably don't
No.
have a country.
Most
They
of
jumped
them
from
were very
continent
good,
to
loyal
continent.
people and landowners and respectable sea captains initially. But then they were declared pirates because it suited the government who wanted the gold and stuff for themselves. And now that the arguments back home are over, we don't want you taking your large share. So, yeah. It's fine when you're doing it against an enemy and it's not our money. It's not fine.
A privateer had to follow regulations only
Yes.
target specific enemies.
Yes.
Where a pirate attacks anyone.
Yes. Exactly that.
A privateer only attacked under national authority.
Yes. So you would have a letter of marque which says that you are allowed to attack that kind of ship.
Okay. And the entire navy will give them safe passage to the enemy.
That would be the general idea. So if I work as a privateer for the English, I will attack all the Spanish and take everything I can from them. but I freely am able to land at any of the British ports to restock. Now, when the war ended and people were declared not privateers but pirates now, that's why places like Tortuga and Port Royal became pirate cities. It was a place where you could get those supplies that wasn't under the command of the crown. Now, they could never, or at least the English privateers could never dock at a Spanish port, because to the Spanish they were pirates. But once the English ports were closed to them, they needed somewhere, and hence Tortuga. That's how it rose to be. Very interesting story. The Golden Age. What did a pirate look like? Well, it could be almost anything. But it's certain ones that made the stories. William Kidd made the dashing swashbuckler image. Blackbeard made the fearsome, real archetypal pirate. And some of them were very rich even before they started. They did it for shits and giggles because they wanted to, because it mattered.
But these guys, they only have like sailboats. Obviously, they didn't have like motor engines.
No, they were all sailboats, absolutely. Wooden sailing vessels.
Yeah, I wonder how those sailboats actually work. And you can spot the ship probably from a distance, and it's probably going to take a couple of hours before it gets to you.
Yes, but they are very, very unmaneuverable, and your ability to sail it depends on the wind.
Yeah.
And merchant ships are generally designed to be very stable and able to carry large amounts of cargo. They're not designed to be fast at all. Whereas a sloop, like the Corsairs used, is designed to be fast for use in fighting. So you see the problem.
But probably still slow for today's engines.
Oh,
today's
yes.
engines don't use sails anymore.
Absolutely. And the problem with sails, I can be bearing down on you, cutlass in hand, and the wind drops, and we sit and look at each other and like,
You could probably take a nap, wait
Yeah.
for the ship to reach you.
You know, it's like, well, there's no wind, so we do nothing until it gets windy again and we can come after and start the chase again.
No.
So it would quite probably have led to a number of very weird situations in that regard. Yeah, a strange situation in many ways. And some of them were clever. Henry Avery, not only one of the great pirates, retired, kept all of his money, wiggled a pardon, and died old in bed. Very few achieved that, though, for all the reasons.
During that time, what was Russia doing?
Not sailing. At this time, they were not known as a naval power.
Okay. I'm just thinking, isn't Russia closer to England than some European countries?
No.
But if you're in England and you just travel north, then you're gonna reach Russia.
No.
The Earth is a circle, you know.
Yes, but
Yes,
Russia is to the right of England.
it's to the east. But if you go north, where do you think you're gonna get?
Greenland.
You go straight north,
Greenland.
past Greenland,
You get to the North Pole.
past the North Pole, back south.
Over the top. Probably the Americas.
You're gonna hit Russia. Russia's big,
It is
and
big,
if you look at a
but
map,
it's to the east.
you've probably looked at a square map your entire life, and that's why you think, like, just going straight north, you're not going to hit anything. You're only going to get Greenland. But if you go straight up, you're going to go down sooner or later. Then you're going to hit Russia.
No, you will hit Africa.
How the hell will you hit Africa?
Because Russia is to the east of England. If you go
Okay.
straight north, you will go up over the top, past the North Pole, and over, no, not Africa, America, South America. You'll come out round there. You'll come up to the west of South America, and eventually hit the middle parts where it meets
That's
North
if you
America.
go around Greenland, but you shouldn't go around Greenland. You must go past it. You have to go straight up.
Okay. But you've still got huge amounts of other lands in between. And Russia was at this time in no way a naval thing. It was under the Tsars, ruled by essentially their emperor. And they had a lot of internal strife at the time, which we know eventually accumulated in the revolution, which involved it becoming the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic. Also, if you're talking wooden ships, there is no way that you're going north. They wouldn't last
No.
5 minutes in the ice.
Yeah. Well, they did settle in Greenland, but Greenland, like, nobody wants to stay there. The population was so small.
And back then it was even smaller. Most of the people
Yeah.
up there, you know, and it's very cold and it's crappy. It's big.
So the US wants to buy Greenland now.
For a lot of strategic reasons, to be fair.
Yeah. Well, they claim if they don't get Greenland, then Russia or China will.
Yes, that's probably true. Or they stop being a bunch of arseholes, declare it a neutral zone that belongs to the people of Greenland, which it does, or to whoever it actually, I think, doesn't Canada own it? I'm not sure.
See, if
But
Russia sends out nukes from their country to America, then it's most likely going to pass Greenland first.
also far more important is to get into that area of the ocean. The only submarine base with access is on the coast of Greenland. And if it goes over to China or Russia, the military bases for America and everyone else up there will be gone, which means that Russia will have the whole North Oceans free for them to do what they like with. And that won't be good. So strategically, from America's point of view, they need a controlling interest to keep their submarine bases open, because one of the best ways to transport a nuke is via submarine underwater where you can't see them until they pop up to launch it.
So why does Denmark own Greenland?
At a certain point in time, they basically divided up the world and said, we'll have this and you can have that, without much interest in asking the locals what they thought of the matter, because the powers at the time were a bunch of elitist arseholes.
Yeah.
I mean, we know that most of the borders around Africa are straight solely because it was easy to draw it on a map, with utter disregard for the local geography or the people. Which is kind of stupid. But
yeah, because I did hear there were Zulus like living on the border, like, on both sides. So I'm not completely sure where, but yeah, the border was drawn.
No, there were no
Yeah,
Zulus.
it was Zulu.
No, it wasn't Zulu. It was
Where
the
does the
people.
Zulu kingdom sit?
No, that was established a bit later. It was the people who are now the Shangaan, if they fell into Mozambique, and the Tsonga, if they fell into what is now South Africa. And yes, they were cut right in half. But they are not Zulu. Not at all.
How is our relationship with Lesotho?
In what way? They're an independent country.
Yeah, I know, but do they have a border? Can I just go there?
No, they have a border. They're an independent country.
Do they come to us?
Oh, yes. Same with Swaziland. There is a border. You can't just walk in.
Okay. Well, I see lots of black people in South Africa complaining about Zimbabweans just walking in.
Well, okay, when I say you can't just walk in, if you were more criminally minded, yeah, absolutely. Their ability to enforce the border is another question entirely. And yes, we have huge numbers of people who walk in. But that's not really a legal thing, is it?
Well, by law, it's probably not, but South Africa is a lawless country.
And that's a different matter entirely, correct?
Yeah, so it's written down that you will be an illegal alien, but...
Yes.
But the cops won't care.
Well, will they find you?
Well, I'm pretty sure they did find a couple of them, but they're too lazy to do their job, so they'll just let you go.
And the problem is they turn around after a day over the border and walk back and carry on regardless. But yes, it is becoming a serious problem. And one of the issues is that these problems are becoming hotter and hotter, because all of the thousands and thousands of jobs that were promised would appear never did. And now they're saying, but now these guys from over in other countries are here taking the jobs we should have had, and as you know, civilization is a very thin veneer.
It's because the illegal aliens, they offer labor for a lot cheaper.
Yes. Absolutely that. Which means that they can get away with a huge amount. It's not necessarily right or good, and you can be on multiple opinions as to who, what, where, and why, but it does happen, does it not?
Yeah, yeah. Now they're angry at white people for hiring Zimbabweans. I see them a lot on social media complaining.
Yes, I do too. But given that a great many of the people doing the hiring are not white,
Yeah. No, I can imagine. I mean,
so
you're,
it's a stuff up.
and I think white people, their hiring practices are normally the guy who can do the job.
Well, yes, it's not politically motivated.
Yeah.
And it does become a problem for a lot of people. But alas, this is how it is. And it don't, which means that, well, sooner or later, it's the same problem they've got in America right now, where everyone's bouncing around shouting, what about the rights of the illegal aliens? And the other side are going, hold on, you just called them illegal. Doesn't that mean they don't have rights?
Yeah.
You know, the world is in a mess and something needs to happen one way or another, or everything is going to collapse, including America's going to fall apart, which means the next big power will take over. Britain will not be it. We know this for absolute fact.
Yeah.
There's a reasonable chance my money is going to be on somewhere like India. And maybe that's a good thing.
So you are saying something needs to happen. So I've got an idea of what needs to happen, but what do you think needs to happen?
Honestly, at this stage, I don't know. My biggest thought is people need to wake up and realize that whinging about rights and moaning about who I am and who you are and where you came, it doesn't help. What you need is to produce food, build an economy, make things work, because you can whine all you want, but if you don't have something to eat and running water, you will still starve, whether you are righteous or not.
Mine would be you can moan as much as you want, but just enforce the law.
This is ultimately part of the problem, because laws are there for a reason. And when you make excuses to the law and exceptions to the law, and as they are doing all over, basically people will turn around and do exactly what they've done throughout history and say, well, clearly, if Spooky's allowed to get away with it, so can I. And I will go a step further.
Yeah, whataboutism. They love whataboutism.
Yes, absolutely.
I can do it because they do it.
And of course, somebody somewhere will say, oh, Spooky, because what you did to my people 300 years ago, I am suffering for, so I don't have to do X or Y, but you do. And you're going to be like, hold on, wait, I didn't do any of that.
Yeah, they love doing it. People that they don't know did something to people that they don't know. So now they can do it to innocent people.
I mean, I was watching somebody bounce off the other day because of what you did to me through slavery. And I was thinking to myself, do you know, I've never owned a slave. That wasn't you. I've never owned a slave, not once in my life, not of any kind. Yeah. So
and their ancestors were probably slave owners.
Oh yes. A great many, if you actually look at history, a great many slave owners in the Americas were black.
Yes, I know. I've
just
seen
as
it.
an
I've
example.
searched it. I looked up for it. But they
So,
all, in America, they like to talk about slavery. But
yeah,
wasn't it the white people that freed them?
exactly that. I mean,
Yeah. They
the
didn't
problem
enslave them. They were already slaves.
the problem with history is that it's not even the ones that write it that are the ones who enforce things. It's people come with agendas and then fit history to suit their agenda and say, oh no, it did happen like that. Really? Did
Yeah.
it? You know, the more you look at it, the more you realize that we really are being led down the garden path voluntarily on our part by the few who are incredibly rich and are laughing at you. You know, that's the bottom line. And while the man himself, in my opinion, is a fairly repugnant person, at the end of the day, Trump's right. I mean, he might be a
Yeah.
bit of an arsehole, and he is, but he's also right. And the problem with Trump is you can't bribe him. He's got his own money, which he earned legit.
Yeah.
You
No,
can't,
he's a strong leader.
yes, you can't force him because after years in heavy business, he's the kind of guy that says, is it? You challenge me, I will do it. And then he does, which makes him terribly dangerous and not very manipulatable. So, of course, a
Yeah.
lot of people hate him because he upsets everybody. Now, would I like him as a good friend to come round and visit me at home? No. But as a leader? Oh, well, that's a different story. He's the right person to lead America.
Yeah.
You know, I don't have to
Because,
like him.
first of all, he doesn't lie.
No.
Where
And he
every other
doesn't need
politician that
to,
I've seen lies.
pretty much. And you, as I say, he's already got all the money he wants because of his
Yeah.
businesses. So he's not in it to win it, to make money. He doesn't
Yeah.
need to. He's got his money. You
But
can't bribe him because he's got more than you got.
I'm sure there are probably a lot of better leaders. They just don't have the popularity.
Well, I think it's time for the world to stop worrying about what's popular or what's traditional and start voting for what actually makes the country work.
You know.
And too many things. I mean, look at England. They are now going with the what we ought to do because it's nice. Nice doesn't make a country work. And now you have a shithole with most people on the dole.
Yeah. No, I'm pretty sure their ancestors are very proud of them.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I'm not saying they did it in the right way, but once they ruled most of the world, a tiny island, super
Yeah.
powerful. Now they're a joke.
Yeah. Yeah, and they're a joke.
Bottom line. Bottom line. And if you really want to whine about slavery, some of the first serious slaves that were internationally sold in history were the British by the Moors. Just saying.
Well, the British, hundreds and thousands of them died
Yes.
trying to free slaves.
Yes. So, you know, you want to point fingers. At what point in history? There are only two races in the world that have not been involved in extreme war or cruelty against other races. And the only reason for it, because it's the San and the Eskimo, is because nobody else lives where they do mostly, and their life is hard to the degree that you haven't got time to muck around with war and arguing.
Yeah.
You know, I'm just saying, if they lived in a better place, they probably would.
Yeah. And they'll probably be happy when somebody comes and visits.
Right? So, yeah, the world is made up of lies and misinformation. We know this.
The other day on social media, I saw this American woman coming to South Africa as a tourist. And then black people in South Africa were like, when are you going back?
Well, there's a very interesting book that was written by an American guy who was inspired, I think it was by the TV program Roots. And he decided, you know what, I'm going to find mine. And he went and toured Africa looking for his roots and his original pride. And when he got home, in his book, he says, listen, I'm an American. I live in America. I'm not from there, and I have nothing in common with any of them. I belong here. It is what it is, you know. And it's true in a lot of ways that, I mean, if you were to say, am I British? No, hell I'm not. Yes, I have family there, extended family from back whenever, but I'm nothing like them. I'm not British. I have nothing in common with them. I'm a South African. I have more in common with people here.
I won't go to Europe.
No. If you tell me go
With
home...
my posts, what that I post, I'll get locked up.
Yeah, with your posts, they won't let you. Ah, Mr. Spooky, welcome. We've been waiting for you. Oops. So yes, it is an issue. But fortunately, it is not up to me to solve the problems of the world, because if it was, I would be very mean. But we do need to go on in the next live with something interesting. And I have a couple of ideas, but I do think we need more. So if you have any cool ones, I want something truly spooky.
Spooky?
Yes. Something really scary and supernatural. I like the idea of that, and we need something like that. We've been too real for a little while. Something paranormal. So if you can think of anything, do let me know. And we will do our best. But if you can't, well, I will come up with something good. At some point, we must look into the ninja and the samurai, because that's cool.
Well, I've got some thing, but I don't think there's a lot of content about her.
Yes.
I mean, I would like to know more about her.
Yes.
But I don't think there's a lot of stories about her.
Yes.
And that would be Lilith.
Ah, I actually do know quite a fair bit. I will do you a whole lot on Lilith for the next live, because yes, there is quite a bit actually, and there's far more than you might think.
Okay.
So tomorrow night it will be Lilith. Done and done,
Awesome.
sir. But until then, thanks to everybody that joined in. Thanks for everybody that was briefly here. Not very many people lately. I don't know why. But nevertheless, and until then, have a wonderful evening. Sleep well, sleep sweet, sleep deep. And we will see you in the next one. Good night.
Okay, cool. Good night. Cheers.